Good evening, everybody. Perfect. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all very much for taking the time to come out tonight to the final public open house for the Lincoln Fields Secondary Plan. My name is Justin Kedzier, and I am the file lead for the secondary plan and with the city's policy planning team. And ready to, happy to have you all here tonight. So we'll go to the next slide and start with the land recognition. Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Today, Ottawa is home to approximately 40,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Ottawa's Indigenous community is diverse, representing many nations, languages, and customs. The city honors the land of the First Peoples, as well as all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis in Ottawa, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Next slide, please. So a bit of housekeeping issues before we begin. So this is a virtual Zoom meeting. All participants will be muted during the presentation. And because of the number of people participating, whenever we get to our question periods, where there will be 3 different times to ask questions, questions can be submitted using the chat function. And you are welcome to send out your questions to our moderator, Elizabeth, or to the, I believe there's somebody on this call named questions, so you can direct their questions there, and then they'll ask whenever during the appropriate time. And from there, I will also like to request that if any media are present, that they are required to identify themselves to our moderator and to do so using the chat function. Veuillez prendre note que cette présentation se déroulera exclusivement en anglais. Donc, si vous avez des questions en français, par contre, sentez-vous à l'aise à les envoyer dans la chat. Puis ensuite, ça me ferait plaisir de les répondre en français. Merci. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, my name is Justin Kedzier. You can say Joss if that's a lot easier. And I am a planner with the policy planning team at the city and the file lead for this project. And I am joined tonight with my fellow colleagues in policy planning, notably Peter Giles, who's the senior planner who oversees secondary plans and has been a great collaborator and great colleague in this project and has been very involved. So I'm very happy to have Peter here, as well as Royce Fu, who is the manager of policy planning and who has provided a lot of very important strategic input on this project. So I'm very happy to have them both here. I'll also introduce you to Elizabeth White, who is our moderator, who you'll hear a lot more of during the various question periods. And last and certainly not least, we have with us tonight the councillor for Ward 7, Teresa Kavanagh. I know she'd like to make a few opening remarks. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to you, councillor.
Thanks, Joss, and thanks to the whole team. And thanks for everyone for coming out. I know this is very anticipated. It's very exciting. This is a lot of change, and we want it to be change for the better. We have mandates to do intensification in the urban areas. This is an opportunity to do it well because in some cases, we have almost a blank slate and an opportunity to make good things happen. So you'll hear a lot from the planners. They've worked really hard. They've worked with the stakeholders in the communities that you live in. So we've got some of the representatives of the projects here. It's very, very exciting, and your input is very valuable. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Joss, and we'll get going. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you, Elizabeth and team. And thank you, Councillor, for those opening remarks. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I can give you a bit of an overview of what we'll be discussing tonight. So this is about a 50 to 60-minute presentation. So and to start us off, I'll go over the secondary plan. For some of you, this might be your first introduction to the secondary plan process, or maybe city building in general. So I'll give you a bit of a background of an understanding of what is going on here, of what it is we're bringing forward as an idea. And then I'll go for the vision for the Lincoln Fields area and kind of the intended function and objectives of the secondary plan for the majority of the presentation. And that includes 3 main components. The first is we'll go over the Kitchissippi-Mekong and Carling Avenue intersection. So this is a really exciting enterprise, a really exciting opportunity to do something really cool and innovative around our transit station and to really rethink about transportation in the area. And there'll be a lot of information at this point. So while it's fresh in your memory, while it's fresh in your minds, while you've just received the information, we'll have a dedicated question period immediately following so that it doesn't get lost as we present more content. And then following that, we'll go over 2525 Carling Avenue and the master planning exercise that's been going on there. So this is the former mall site where the current Metro, Rexall, and Wendy's are located. And we have actually RioCan, who's the landowner here, and their architects who will go over the concepts that have been worked on. And similarly, there'll be a lot of information at this point. So we'll have another dedicated question period for you to ask your questions while the information is still fresh. And then the third component to this will go over the proposed designations for the various areas, as well as the proposed permitted building heights. And then after that, we'll finish it off with the next steps and then go into a more robust and lengthy question period. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, please. So now, so some of you, this might be your first time that you're exposed to a secondary plan. So if we'll go to the next slide, I can give you a bit of an understanding of what's going on here. So a secondary plan is a statutory policy document under Section 16 of the Planning Act and is part of the city's official plan. So these are these long-range neighborhood studies, these city-initiated studies that guide the growth and development of a community, particularly a community that's expected to see significant change over the short, medium, and long term. And so in this case, in the Lincoln Fields area, we have the O train station coming, and transit often brings a lot of change to an area, particularly rapid transit. And so this is an opportunity for the city to come in and provide a bit more of a firmer hand in directing how that change and that growth will happen. And so this can look like establishing building heights that are more fitting for the local context and the building fabric, or the lot fabric, and looking at what kind of land uses would be best suited for the area. It also looks to identify desired community amenities, particularly parks and pathways, and to a certain extent can direct improvements to the public realm and the mobility network to ensure that we can get to where we want to go and that these are comfortable places to be in. And so once the policies are adopted and in effect, they will apply, or any new development that comes in within the secondary plan area will be revised against the policy of the secondary plan to make sure that they're in conformity. With that, we'll go to the next slide, please. So now the objectives for the secondary plan. So again, we have transit coming. I'm sure we're all very excited to see the extension of Line 1 and Line 3, and Lincoln Fields O train station will be the transfer station where these two lines converge. So this is a very key area to the city's overall transit network. And we want to ensure that people can access the station, that transit becomes the favorite mode of transportation. We as the city have a strategic objective over the long term to see that a majority of trips within the city are done through sustainable means of transportation. So that's walking, cycling, and transit. And so transit being a really big part of that. So ensuring that access to the station is at the forefront of what we're doing here. And in order to get there, in order to improve this access, we really need to look to improve the ways we get to the station. So improving the active transportation facilities, so the cycle tracks, the sidewalks, the pathways that lead and bring us to the station, as well as looking to improve the public realm while we get to our parks, while we go through our cycle tracks, that we walk through an environment that's comfortable and that's enjoyable and follows good design principles. Particularly around transit, we want to see the increase in supply of the supply of diversity of housing options. We want to see people live. We want to see a great number of people living around transit. We want to ensure that that the greatest densities across the city are always closest to transit to make sure that people have the option that most people can use transit. And so although the secondary plan can't necessarily has minimal impact on certain economic factors, particularly relating to affordability, it does have its role to play to ensure that there is more housing, that we can do what we can in the face of the housing crisis. And if we increase the amount of people around transit, we need to increase the number of services and amenities nearby. So to ensure that there's a variety of non-residential uses to support the increases of density. So to see those commercial and retail uses that make a space enjoyable, that brings us out of our homes, to make sure that we can access what we need on a day-to-day basis within a comfortable walk of our homes. And so increases in density and the increase of non-residential amenities really go hand in hand together. We need, if we want to bring people to an area, we need to have commercial. And in order to support the commercial, we need the critical mass of people necessary to support it. So these really are in tandem. And another objective of this plan is to clarify the city's expectations around and improve the predictability of development outcomes. So a secondary plan can't guarantee or can't promise what development will look like, but does provide a lot more certainty, or provides a much clearer idea of what growth and development will look like. And with that, I'll go to the next slide, please. So one of the big components that the secondary plan is bringing forward is an idea that's been floated around for quite a few years now around the Kichisibe-Mikan, so the former SJAM Parkway, and where it intersects with Carling. And if you go to the next slide, can focus on on what's being proposed here. So as we all know, the Kichisibe-Mikan currently terminates at Carling Avenue on both the north and the south side, and takes up and is using these really large land-intensive free-flowing ramps. Right now, it's right in, right out access. It's a very suburban style of transportation. It was built in the late 60s, early 70s, and it's just a very old school way of thinking around transportation that doesn't account for transit, that doesn't account for pedestrians or cyclists. And although this image doesn't show all the current construction happening for the O train, doesn't show that it actually makes Carling look kind of pleasant, but we all know Carling is a very hostile environment, particularly to cyclists and pedestrians. And so a priority for the secondary plan is to improve the pedestrian access to the station. And it was from the very beginning of the study, it was very clear that these loops here, that these interchanges are a deterrent to that and make it very unsafe. And quite frankly, also, we have a very beautiful green space around it, and actually quite hinder the quality of this green space. And so it was, so it's something that we're looking forward, and I'm hoping that you'll all share the excitement with me tonight, is the idea of really reducing a lot of the asphalt here, reducing a lot of the road and car infrastructure here to thin it out, to make it a lot more land efficient, and to hopefully lead to improving safety and comfort for pedestrians and cyclists. And so that would look like and so what we've been discussing is removing the southern ramps and consolidating vehicular access to the north side of Carling. And so this is actually an idea that was brought up back in 2016 by the National Capital Commission, who's the landowner for the green space, the creek, as well as the operator and maintainer of the Mikan. And so this was during the early discussions of the Stage 2 project, it was discussed to see if it could be included as part of the scope of work. If it could be included as part of the scope of work for the LRT extension. At the time, it was deemed too expensive, so the idea never really it wasn't included in part of that package. But it doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea. Queen's University actually a few years ago conducted a study and determined that something that would be a significant improvement to the area would be if they removed the southern ramps and consolidated the parkway access to the north side of Carling. And then we've had quite a few transportation consultants come to the same conclusion. So time and time again, it's been discussed and it's come out that what is currently there is not desirable, is not really efficient, and is not conducive to good city building. But I'm sure you're probably curious, if it was too expensive back then, why is it doable or feasible now? And with that, we can go to the next slide. So you'll see this red circle here goes around the Carling Bridge. This bridge structure provides access for the southern ramps, as well as for the transitway and 2 multi-use pathway connections. It's come up that pretty recently that this bridge is scheduled for a costly life cycle extension shortly after the opening of the O train. This is preventative maintenance to increase the lifespan of this bridge by about somewhere around 20 to 30 years. And but it'll be a multi-million-dollar project. It'll be a bit of construction that comes after the opening of the O train, just to keep the status quo. And so if during our discussions with the NCC, we've determined that it was desirable to remove the southern ramps. So that may, to remove the southern ramps. And it's also been clarified recently through the state by my colleagues at the rail office that as part of the scope of work for the Stage 2 project, they will be actually decommissioning the transitway. And so if we remove the transitway and if we remove the southern ramps, the bridge structure it becomes redundant. It becomes a redundant bridge besides for the multi-use pathways, but there's workarounds there. So there's an opportunity here to instead of using those funds to extend the life of the bridge, that we could use those funds to create a berm or some kind of embankment to keep Carling at grade, but actually eliminate the need, eliminate a structure for the city to maintain over the long term. And so this is so this presented an idea overall to reduce the city's long-term operations costs, but to also improve pedestrian access and cycling safety along Carling. And another piece to all this is in the northern part of the interchanges, in the northern loops, there's a wastewater pipe. And so this is one of the largest pipes in the city that moves a lot of sewage and a lot of wastewater. Every home in the West End, their waste eventually flows through this pipe. And it's been revealed through work going on in the infrastructure master plan, it's been determined that this pipe is nearing capacity. And so it's within the short to medium term city's plan to actually upgrade this pipe. And so this is another construction project that will be happening after the opening of the O train station. So now there's quite a bit going on here. We now are there's quite a lot going on. And so it's made for a really unique timing opportunity to really think about what can be done and how can we do it all in a coordinated way. So if we go to the next slide, I can give you a bit of a better understanding of the different opportunities here. So we have the decommissioning of the transitway, which is construction that will be happening after the opening of the LRT. We have if we replace the Carling Bridge with some kind of berm or embankment, if we remove the parkway ramps and create a new protected intersection, and then we can thin out the Mikan, or not thin out the Mikan, but at least straighten it out so that it becomes way less land intensive. And then in one go, we can also look to upgrade wastewater infrastructure. We then would also look to extend the cycling tracks along Carling. All of this leads to much better urban outcomes, to much safer outcomes for pedestrians and cyclists, particularly around transit. And with all the freed up land, there's actually a really interesting opportunity, a really cool city building opportunity with the NCC and for residential development on their land. So as I mentioned before, there's quite a beautiful green space in this creek here. And currently, as it is with with all the land dedicated for car use, it's not as agreeable or as it could be. Whereas having a building there, so having people who live around the area, having people who this is their backyard, makes for a much more enticing environment, makes for something a lot more comfortable, for people to come and play and to recreate and to bring their pets, to bring their loved ones for a picnic. All while increasing housing options and, while increasing density around transit. So there's many objectives here that we can hit in one fell swoop. So this is looking to save the city a lot of money in the long-term maintenance of a bridge structure that's no longer needed, free up a lot of land and remove a lot of land currently dedicated for car movements, and which by removing a lot of this asphalt helps with our reduce the urban heat island effect. Also, as part of this, something that we need to do as the city is to add cycle tracks along Carling to ensure that cyclists can safely navigate Carling, and then some. And so all this brings a really unique timing opportunity, and something that can be a very unique and exciting enterprise here. Something that I'd like to mention that's kind of not super obvious on the screen, and it's unfortunate that I can't point to it. But if we just see along Carling Avenue, just immediately by the station, you'll see these very thin black lines, and yeah, I see Laura who's sharing her screen right now. Her just a bit south, Laura, just along Carling. They run east-west on, yeah, if you move your mouse up just a little bit above the Carling Ave, yeah, you'll see these black lines along the road. Um, and then if you bring it down a little bit, yeah, so you see these lines, and if they go all the way along Carling, and actually, so those are cycle tracks that are proposed to be built by Stage Two, that are currently being built by the rail office, and those are going to be yeah. So and they are currently proposed to terminate and to end just before the bridge. So if you're a cyclist coming from Richmond, going down the pathways on the NCC land, and you come along Carling, you're in your dedicated cycling lane, you're having a good time, you're safe, and then suddenly the cycle track just ends, and now you are dropped in the curbside lane, sharing a lane with cars and vehicular traffic. So what was and honestly, it's very upsetting, and has been, or we've deemed it very unacceptable to have the cycle track just abruptly end on a busy arterial road. And so something that we're definitely pushing for, and that really has to be done in the coming years, is to continue and to extend that cycle track. So because right now, a cyclist who a, a cyclist has to share the curbside with a car, like that's unsafe for the cyclist, that's very stressful and nerve-wracking for the driver. Nobody's having a good time here, and yeah, so it's something that through all this work will be addressed. So yeah, that and so with that, we'll go to the next slide and kind of talk a bit about the work that's currently been done. um, so we've completed, or yeah, we were moving this a little bit along, but not too much work has happened yet, because this is quite a large initiative. But right now, we've retained a transportation consultant to conduct a traffic analysis. And so we're hoping to hear back in the coming months on whether the idea that's being proposed here will lead to good mobility outcomes. Of course, going from free-flowing ramps to a signalized intersection does have an impact on drivers, but the free-flowing ramps also have a negative impact on cyclists. So it's a traffic analysis that really looks at the different modes and to see if what we're proposing will lead to good mobility outcomes for all modes of transportation. And pending the results of that analysis, if it comes back saying that this does lead to good mobility outcomes, then the secondary plan is proposed to bring forward policy direction to say that this is the city and the NCC and the National Capital Commission's vision to consolidate the parkway access and to do all this work. Following that, after that'll then be voted on at council, ideally in early 2024. And following council's approval, then we will begin a detailed functional design study that will be integrated with an environmental assessment, where this will account for the construction details. This is where we'll get our full cost estimates, look at the environmental impacts, and it'll also do all the design elements for the multiple pieces. So it'll look at the wastewater pipe upgrade. It'll look at the removal of the transit way. It'll look at the extension of cycle tracks, the design of the actual intersection of the actual realignment and straightening of the Mekong. So it'll do quite a lot of work and get at the details that I'm sure that everybody wants to know. And then from there, we will work to secure capital funds and work on all the construction preparation somewhere around 2026, with construction to begin after the opening of the O train station, so somewhere around 2027. And we'll go to the next slide, but before we get into the questions, something I just want to echo a little bit here is right now, if the secondary plan doesn't do anything, right now we're looking at quite a bit of construction in the area. So I know many of you are probably frustrated of the ongoing LRT construction. And I'm not coming here today to say I'm coming here today to say that right now, if we don't do anything, or if nothing new comes, there will still be a lot of construction even after the opening of the O train. This includes the upgrade of the wastewater pipe, which is something the city has to do. This includes the the life cycle extension of the bridge, which is something the city has to do. We have to extend cycle tracks and sidewalks along Carling, which is something we have to do. And the decommissioning of the transit way is a big piece, which is something that has already been paid for and is part of the stage 2 scope of work. So it's something that will be done. So even without consolidating the parkway access to the north side of Carling or the removal of those ramps, there was a lot of construction planned for this area. And at this point, it's looking like it'll be done in a disjointed manner. So we're hoping through the secondary plan process to make sure that it's all streamlined, to make sure that it's all coordinated and that shovels hit the ground only once, as opposed to now where it's looking like it might be 3 or 4 different initiatives where, and also this is ideally going to do to ensure that we don't just keep the status quo either, that we actually can advance other city goals related to mobility and housing. So with that, I'll pass it off to Elizabeth for our question period.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So just a reminder that questions are submitted via the chat to questions, like one-questions host. And we are sort of taking them while Jocelyn speaks, and we've grouped them by theme so we can be efficient. So first and foremost, we've got some questions about traffic. So if the southern on-ramp is going away, this resident presumes eastbound cars will flow onto the parkway by making a left turn on Carling. So hundreds of cars are going to be turning left. There's a concern that this will back up traffic, and our cars still going to be able to get on and off the parkway from Carling.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's part of the reason why we've commissioned a traffic analysis to get a really precise understanding of those impacts. If you could go back just 2 slides to where that little drawing is. Yeah, there you go, this one. So right now the existing intersection or the existing access to the parkway is further west on both sides, and so what we're proposing is to actually shift the intersection to be about 150 meters further east, to add a lot more room between Connaught and the intersection. So we'll have a fulsome understanding shortly from our transportation consultants on what those numbers will look like. They're doing a traffic count, trip generator, or trip volume generator analyses, and so on. But I will say that this will impact vehicular access. This will likely make it slow down access to the Mekong. And I don't think that's a problem necessarily. That's not particularly around this multi-billion-dollar investment in transit. We want to ensure that cycling, biking, and transit have premium access, and then cars, although are still accounted for, are still able to be mobile and to move, do not come before the safety of pedestrians and transit users. And I think that's it. Or I think that addresses the question, Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you, Jocelyn. Just a quick one here. Why remove ramps and add a traffic light when that will increase congestion and delay on Carling?
So I think similar to what I just said, the idea here is the ramps are currently are unsafe for pedestrians and cyclists, are very car oriented. The signalized intersection ensures that people can move at appropriate times, that they have their dedicated time to make turns, to move, and to navigate the space. The ramps themselves are also, and part of it too is an objective here is to also free up land around transit for other opportunities, for better uses of these lands. So the ramps currently are currently used to move traffic. However, they could be reused to house more people around transit. So it's a different understanding, a different thinking about what this land could be done and how to understand how this land could be done. And if I could maybe add go back a little bit to the previous question, but also I think address this question by shifting the intersection further east. By shifting the intersection further east, there will be minimal impacts or relatively fewer impacts between the other intersections along Carling, particularly Connaught, and compared to where the existing access to the parkway is. And through the analysis that we're working through, the functional design that will be commissioned, there will be looks at there will be counts and analyses done to determine what is the optimal timing for these lights to make sure that as many cars can make left turns as possible. And I think there was a follow-up question, or there was another part that was, this will be a full turn movement intersection. So people can come off the parkway or the Mikan in both directions, and people can access the parkway, the Mikan, from both directions as well.
Okay, thanks. So moving to a couple questions about cycling. How will the MUPs connect from the north-south of Carling safely and without discontinuity, like traffic lights without the bridge?
And that's something that actually Councillor Kavanagh has been very vocal about, is those two Maltese pathways that are currently in the valley. Through the work that we're proposing, if we fill it with a berm or some kind of embankment, that there could be little tunnels that there would be tunnels that are maintained for those pathways, and tunnels are very significantly less complicated to manage than a whole bridge structure. So it's a lot easier to maintain a tunnel.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if this is related. Where is the MUP on west side of redesigned Mikan, and how does it cross Carling? Is that similar to what was just asked?
So there's currently a MUP that follows the there's a MUP that follows the ramp that borders on the property boundaries, so further west than what's on this image here. And though granted, we'll see what the functional design recommends, but I would assume those are proposed to be maintained and kept. They're a little bit lower, but that those would be maintained, and that would actually then connect to the redevelopment happening on 2525 Carling, the mall site.
Okay. And there's a question, it's very short, and maybe I don't understand this acronym. Does this impact the QTN MUP? And if so, how?
Oh, the Queensway Terrace North MUP. I believe that references to the MUP on the south side of Carling that then leads to the pedestrian bridge. The only impact would be depending on if it needs to be relocated, but not necessarily significantly. The connection would be maintained.
And then we'll just do a quick question here around green space, and then we'll move back to the presentation. So on slide 12, the last bullet there mentions NCC residential land. Is that not parkland?
So it's currently designated as green space, but not parkland. Parkland has a very specific meaning in a planning context in Ontario. So this is currently designated as green space, both in city policy and policy for the National Capital Commission. However, although it's designated as greenland, I would argue it doesn't really function. Any space that's really dedicated for cars, that is covered in asphalt, that has vehicular emissions, that retains a lot of heat from the asphalt, I would say really does a disservice to the surrounding green space. And that
And just sort of a follow-up on the NCC land there. Has the city / the NCC considered renaturalizing the creek instead of leaving it underground Carling Ave?
It's been brought up. It's been brought up, and I see the councillor raising her eyebrows, and it is something that the NCC is I know that they will be looking at. I'll be honest, I don't have the answers today. I'm sure as part of the functional design, it'll be something that's considered or that's looked at. But as of today, I can't say yes or no if but it's definitely been brought up a number of times.
Okay, thanks. Well, maybe we'll let you get back to the presentation. Questions are coming in quite fast, but we're going to continue to group them by theme, and we have another opportunity in a few minutes to get through a few more. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. So now, we can go, just before I pass it off to Stu from RioCan, we'll get to 2525 Carling Avenue. So this is the mall site, the former mall site where the current Metro and Rexall and Wendy's are. I'm sure it was actually probably a significant reason why some of you are here today is you're curious to know what's going on. And over the last 2 years, we've been working with RioCan and the team pretty closely. And I want to say that I'm very excited about what's going to be proposed, what's being proposed here today. The RioCan has shown themselves to want to be a collaborator in city building and a really good neighbor for the community. And I'm very happy with what's being brought forward. I'll add the caveat that what you're about to see are not site plan drawings. They're not final architectural renderings, but are conceptual drawings that show the vision for the area, that show the vision that the secondary plan allows for. And yeah, and with that, I'll pass it off to Stu.
Thanks, Jocelyn. First of all, can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yep, I can hear you.
Get a thumbs up. That's great. Yeah, I would like to give, I'm just going to give a little bit of background and color here on how we got to this point. I'm sure there's a number of people in the meeting today and on the call that have been on this journey with us, but I suspect there are also some people that have not been around since the beginning of our venture here. In fact, we started our exploration of what we could do with Lincoln Field Shopping Center in the future even before Councillor Kavanaugh was Councillor Kavanaugh with the previous councillor. So we go back quite a ways on this. The trigger for us was twofold. I think most people know who we are, but we are a large, typically or historically retail landlord. We own over 200 shopping centers in Canada. We own 20, almost 30, I believe, in Ottawa alone. But we, about 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, we started to transition ourselves as the retail world started to change, as in some instances, as we did here at Lincoln Fields, as we lost tenants. We started to, recognize that even if it was not the best shopping center site anymore, or was failing a little bit as a shopping center, it was generally, and Lincoln Fields is one of these examples, it was generally a great piece of real estate, situated well within the particular city that we were in, and perhaps had a higher and greater value down the road than it did in its current form. So we had actually started a program within our company where we evaluated every property we owned, and determined the ones that we felt were best suited for future intensification, future redevelopment. But in every case, there was always a retail lens to it. We still are very much a retail landlord, and we want to make sure that retail survives or is at least reimagined on the properties that we redevelop. I think we've got examples in Ottawa that many of you may be aware of, where this program has started and its initial phases have now been constructed. So it's something that we've married ourselves to very strongly. In every instance, though, the other three properties that we have commenced redevelopment on in Ottawa, and some 30-odd properties across the country, we very much have worked collaboratively with the municipalities involved, and realized that these are generally larger pieces of property that they can have a significant impact on the surrounding community if not done properly. So as Jocelyn has mentioned, we've been very much part of the secondary plan process in a collaborative fashion here. We went through similar exercises at our Gloucester site, out at the Blair LRT station, at Westgate, where we now have a building up at Carling and Maryvale, and at Elmville Acres up at St. Laurent and Othello, where we now have a residential building up. But in all of those instances, there is still a shopping center in place. I think the critical thing for people to understand when reinventing a shopping center is it's not a come along and build multiple buildings all at one time situation. There are tenant lease factors, retail lease factors that are always in play and that we have to consider. And I think, as I've said to some people that we've discussed this project with before, tenant leases are about the strongest legal documents there seem to be out there. If the tenant doesn't want to cooperate or doesn't want to go dark, then or move to another location, then our hands are tied. So in every instance, we've worked with the municipalities involved, and in this case Ottawa included, to create a vision and a master plan for the property that allows for phasing over time. Lincoln Fields became a little bit of an accelerated version of that due to some economic conditions that occurred a number of years ago when Walmart left the property. And as soon as Walmart left, suddenly we had a shopping center that was losing money monthly, not making money monthly. And as anyone in business knows, you can't sustain constant losses for very long before it becomes a problem. So at that point, we made the decision to work with the tenants who we felt were part of a long-term solution, but also that had very strong controls in their leases. The obvious two are Metro and Rexall, who we went through an approval process with the city to get that new locations for them approved, but locations that we knew in the long term we could incorporate into a master plan. And based on the length of term in a master plan of this scale, in one instance, we suspect their lease will have expired and they'll be gone by the time we need to relocate them. So, and because of all of that, in Lincoln's case, we basically tore them all down. We tore it down in pieces, which some of you may have noticed, which was done as part of our legal obligation to Metro and Rexall to keep them operational while we built their new premises. All of that was a number of years ago. That has all happened. They're both up and running, doing quite well. Now we're excited to get on to the next step. The one good thing about all of that is we have freed up a number of very exciting areas around the property, both short-term and long-term, where we can create the master plan vision that you're going to see here in a minute. And we're very excited about moving forward at Lincoln Fields with the introduction of residential and institutional and other uses that we think are important in the building of any city or community. So I think with that kind of slightly high-level business explanation, Jocelyn, I think I'll turn it over to Rod, who will do a much better job than I could of explaining the elements within the master plan that we've been working with the city on for the last couple of years.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Justin, have you got a presentation up?
Yeah. Would you like us to go to the next slide?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this is, would say, a sort of a high-level concept plan. And just to get everybody oriented to the drawing, is Carling Avenue is on the bottom of the page. Richmond is the diagonal road at the top of the page. On the left, we've got Croydon Avenue, which is basically the west side of the site, and the east side of the site is the parkway, as well as the land owned by Osgood. So when we very first thing we started, after we had sort of gone through the whole process of trying to find a place to locate the Metro, was how we sort of bring about where we place them, that we don't do something that impedes the future development. And so after a lot of negotiations, we found a site, the Metro, which is currently, if we look at this site, it's basically that green area to the right in between E and B is essentially, that's the Metro as it stands today. So one of the guiding principles that we really want to do is trying to recreate a main street. So really try to create sort of some pedestrian friendly environment. And so we created a north-south street that will link Carling Avenue to Richmond Road. The Carling Avenue entrance is in its current location. The entrance on Richmond Road is relocated somewhat to the west, a little bit more mid-block than what it is right now. And when we began to get into the design, we began realizing this would be a perfect place actually to put a municipal street in. So through this process, will be creating a plan that this will become a municipal street. And it's been designed with both pedestrian sidewalk, bike path, on-street parking, and 2 lanes of traffic. And the whole idea is to create an environment that's like a Richmond Road, almost that sort of scaled down version of a traditional main street, that people can park their car, run into a store quickly, come out. It helps slow down traffic. So we don't want this to be a speedway through the site. And then the other was to now link east-west, and we wanted to create that link from Croydon Avenue through the site, across in front of the current Metro location, and then out with a pedestrian bicycle location to the parkway to the east. So you can see the arrow on the right-hand side. So that's the basic layout of the site, was this sort of cruciform site that creates these two sort of almost main streets. And then working with the city, we began talking about parkland and parkland dedication. And so the idea came up of creating a large central park. The site, it's in a two-phase scenario. The first phase would be built on the west side of that main north-south street. And once the lease is up with the Metro, we have the opportunity to relocate the Metro in one of the other buildings in a podium, putting a tower on top, and then we can green the balance of the site. And so we really can create some unique, I don't think we've ever done anything like this before, to put a park as large as this in a private setting. And it's great, all sorts of opportunities in terms of what that space could be. You can see we've sort of, we threw the idea maybe an amphitheater on the west end of the site. But we like this site is large enough it can do many things. And so during the next sort of over the years in programming, city staff will begin looking at how to program this site and how it best be used. So that would be a whole different design process. We right now will be through the site plan approval process. We'll be dedicating the areas and setting up how the site will be sectioned off over a period of time. So if we look on the north side of the site along Richmond Road, the idea was to scale down the podiums a little bit, lower them down to sort of 4 stories in height, with what we call point towers, smaller towers to get the density up, sort of a courtyard plan for the 2 buildings, both G and F. And then again, as you move forward on the east side of that main street, generally the heights anticipated would be somewhat higher, up in the sort of anywhere from the mid-20s up into possibly up to 40 stories in height. Eventually, when the Metro is gone, we'll have the opportunity to develop the lands along Carling Avenue, the area what we call B, and I think there's the A buildings are right along the street. There is one opportunity right on right at the intersection of where the Parkway comes up. That building under agreement could be built under a first phase or a second phase. And then when Wendy's lease is up, then we can get into the B and C area. So this shows the site at its fullest at some point in the future. So next slide. The next slide, just we pull a little bit further away and we just give a little bit of an architectural expression of the potential buildings. And what we haven't done here is sort of looked at the balance of the area of the secondary plan to see how it could develop. This has really been focused just on the Lincoln Fields property. So you can see those areas that have the high-rise buildings and then the lower podium scale buildings that give that edge to Carling Avenue, edge to our new Main Street, and then of course a nice pedestrian edge along Richmond Road. All of the frontages along those, both Main Street, Richmond Road, Carling Avenue, they're all active street fronts, all with doors that open onto the street, providing that sort of pedestrian connection as you walk through the site. We've also created these sort of areas of, we call them POPs, which are privately owned public spaces that are right by the intersection, and just a place to have some interesting seating. Some could be outdoor cafe areas. So we've got them in throughout the whole site, basically opportunities for some animated private public spaces. Next slide. Oh.
I think we're having a little technical difficulties
There
here. Here we go.
Yeah, so it's going to go through. These are very quick, and as Jocelyn mentioned, these are real sort of concept levels, just to give a sense of scale. You can see this very large public park. As I mentioned, that sort of amphitheater along Croydon Avenue, wide open. This is in its sort of final configuration. That you're looking is the east-west street that connects Croydon through to the Parkway. The next slide. Again, these are views along Carling Avenue. Again, when we speak to that sort of podium expression, the lower scale along the street with terrace areas on the top. We have retail along the ground floor. Again, by the time we finish, we won't be able to duplicate all the retail that was currently on the site, but I think we've got well over 160,000 square feet of retail being reinstated into this site through the podium floors. So next slide. We can go through these fairly quickly. Again, a view from Carling. This is heading west on Carling. You can see the building in the front is that one that could be sort of a phase 1 building along the Parkway. Next slide. This is a view toward that main street. So this is looking from Carling through to Richmond Road. And again, you can see we use the lower scale along the street with the tower sort of pushed back. Again, retail at the front. We've got on-street parking. We've got a nice green space for trees, as well as bike paths going on both sides, as well as sidewalks. And as we develop these, we'll begin creating these areas where we can create sort of outdoor cafe area, gathering areas. You can see the one on the left screen with those sort of seating areas. That's right on the northwest corner of the intersection. And you can see this can be used for any number of things. We just threw some seating out there. It's like a mini park basically, but depending on the adjacent use in the ground floor, it could be an outdoor cafe area, it could be part of this as well. So next slide. This is a view from Richmond Road. We can go through these quickly. Next slide. Again, this is the intersection of the Main Street from the Richmond Road intersection looking south. You can see we've got a little bit lower scale on Richmond Road for the podiums, more of that 3 to 4 story range as opposed to the 6-story range on Carling. Just trying to realize that Richmond Road is different than Carling in terms of road width, and so we generally like to move the podium height a little bit more pedestrian in nature. Next slide. Again, this is a view along that park, looking along Croydon Avenue. You can see the size of this park. It is a significant park. It's 15% of the gross area of the whole park. The whole site is some 14 acres, I believe. So this is like a 2-acre park in that range. So next slide. And this is within the park. So you can see the properties that abut onto the park. We set them back somewhat from the park to allow for walkways and also to create private terrace areas. So the first 2 stories of the buildings that are abut onto the park, generally they're designed to be 2-story townhouses that would be ideally geared toward families. So these can be 3-bedroom units with private yards, direct access to grade. And it's a really nice way to sort of animate this new public space that's going to be created. Each of these units would have private front yard terraces. So it's really like a small row house almost. Next slide. Oh, that's it. I'm happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you very much. So let's focus on some of the questions for future development on this site that we've been looking at. So we have a question here. The plan has several properties on Edgeworth planned. How do you plan to acquire the property on the west side of Edgeworth Ave? Do you plan to expropriate them?
That's outside of the 25 Carling Avenue.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
So we can follow up with that question directly after. So what is the plan for new land parcels identified on both the north and south sides of Carling where the ramps were? Yeah.
Again, that's land, actually, my understanding, it's land owned by the NCC and outside of this area of the presentation.
Okay, we'll
Green
make a,
Man's got enough land that they're dealing with. They don't need any more right now.
okay, thanks. So for a lot of the new housing, there's some question around who would live in the new housing. Would there be any interest in having housing for people on lower incomes or subsidized housing? Exactly, yeah, there's just a few questions around the nature of the housing.
I'd like Stuart to answer that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah. First of all, with a site of this size, there in our mind there will be a wide variety of housing opportunities. I think we're envisioning in our minds seniors opportunities, rental opportunities, work live opportunities. There will likely also be a condo component to a number of the buildings. Although as a REIT, RioCan is actually we prefer rental buildings because the way our income structure works, rental income is good income in our world. So the 4 buildings that we have currently constructed in Ottawa to date, the 4 residential buildings are all rental buildings. And I think there will be a large rental focus here. But with a site of this size, the opportunities for very varied housing mix, I think are there, and we would want to capitalize on that. I think at the same time, we truly do believe it's a cliche, but we're city building here to a certain extent. So if you're city building, you have to offer a wide variety of opportunities in terms of the housing type, stock, tenure, all of those things. And we envision offering those opportunities.
Thank you. So just a bit around some of the noise regarding development. One question really focused around whether the amphitheater is a good option and it could present with some noise for the area. And in general, then, is there going to be a noise study done for all of the development going forward?
I can start with that one, and Rod, I may
Sure.
defer to you as well. I mean, to the amphitheater question, please understand right now, this is just an idea. We wanted to put something on the plan that we thought was a bit innovative. Whether it's an amphitheater at the end of the day, I don't think anyone knows at this point. And if it was, obviously it would have to be programmed in such a way as it was not an issue for the people living there. Yes, as far as noise studies go, I believe, and perhaps Jocelyn or Pete can answer this, but I'm pretty sure there would be noise studies required for every phase of the development. And we would obviously have no issue preparing those. We have done them for our other projects, and have designed the buildings accordingly based on the results of previous noise studies that we've done.
Thank you. So just a couple more quick questions, and then we'll go back to. Oh, Jocelyn, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I could compliment Stuart's question or answer in terms of the parkland, in terms of the amphitheater. So parkland is something that is directed at the city. So whenever a RioCan comes in at the site plan stage, the parkland would then be conveyed to the city, so that it falls within the city's ownership, and so any program or animation falls to the responsibility of the city. And then whatever amenity or programming is provided is done so using either parkland dedication funds or community benefit charges and those funds there. So as those pools of money get built, accumulate over the years upon development, then and there's already existing pools, there's existing funds there, but whenever we're ready, then the city will come in with whatever programming they feel is appropriate. We all really like the amphitheater. I think it was something that was exciting, that was cool, that provides an artistic component, which is and the arts really gather people, they really create community. So that was something that seemed to be very desirable. So I would like to bring forward some tentative language around possibly directing the city to see that amphitheater be built, but that's, to Stu's point, is still quite a ways away. As for noise studies, so these are typically done for the new building themselves, so they are so that to protect the residents from noise. We also have noise bylaws that any construction would have to follow to specify how loud and how late noise can be generated.
Thank you. So final question for this short Q&A. I know there was some talk around the Metro grocery store and the Rexall, but is the long-term RioCan plan to eliminate the Metro grocery store as well as the Rexall and Wendy's?
No, it's not. The plan is definitely not to eliminate them. As I said at the beginning, these sites we try to and plan to integrate. I'll deal with them one at a time. A grocery store, in our mind, is a fantastic amenity for any mixed-use development. Obviously, if you're trying to encourage people to live more of a pedestrian lifestyle or a non-automotive lifestyle, at least to a certain extent, being able to jump on the elevator of your building and go downstairs and get your groceries is a pretty good way to do that. We've had conversations with Metro. What's interesting here is the time that has passed. Please don't take this as a criticism, but it's taken a while to get to where we are now. We had a 20-year window when we started this in terms of Metro's legal obligations to be in a kind of standalone restaurant. I think we're 4 years into that now, or 5. So, it's not, I know that still seems like a long time, but in the grand scheme of development, that's not that far away, where, and then there's actually a trigger in our lease with them where at a point in another, I think it's 6 or 7 years, we can actually start to talk about a relocation option with them within the site. So the intent with Metro, and to a lesser extent Rexall, is to keep them on the property, if not in their current locations, which ultimately through the master plan would not work, then in podiums of new buildings that would be constructed while they are continuing to operate where they are. And then at that point in time, when the new buildings are ready, we can move them over. So we're not that many years away from having those conversations about starting to move them into something that's more permanent within the master plan. I should point out as well, I think from a timing standpoint, to understand a development of this scale, you're probably talking about 2 buildings every 3 to 5 years in terms of construction, lease up, sale, whatever it is you're doing. There's 10 buildings on this site. So, it's easily a 20-25 year build out from the first day. And we're only going to, when Metro and Rexall are up for discussion, we're not even going to be halfway through that window. And we've got a couple of other visions in mind as to where phases would start. By the time we get them done, we'll have the open ability to start to do the relocations with those tenants.
Excellent, thank you. So with that, I think we'll hop back into the slideshow.
Wonderful, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Rod and Stuart, for presenting your concepts and for answering those questions. And if you have more and now for those of you participating, if you have any more questions about this, again, we will have a final question period towards the end. So we'll go to the next slide, please, where I'll present to you the third component of this presentation. So I'll go over the proposed designations and the permitted building heights that are proposed to be brought forward through the secondary plan. So if we can go to the next slide. And before I get to what's being proposed by the secondary plan, I want to take a step back and explain what's currently in effect, what policies currently govern this area. And so what you're seeing on the screen here is an excerpt from Schedule B2 of the official plan. And so this is looking at the current designations that apply. And remember, the official plan is a citywide document. So these are designations that apply to the Lincoln Fields area, but are also apply elsewhere in the city and really are meant to provide a similar function across the city. So you'll note the thick purple bands on both Richmond Road and Carling. So this is the Main Street corridor designation. And so these are high density intensification corridors where we want to see a lot of mix of uses, where we want to see buildings that frame the street, where we want to see an environment that's comfortable for pedestrians. So again, because this is a citywide direction currently, both Richmond and Carling are intended to be treated the same way. And as we all know, these are very different streets. So through the secondary plan, the secondary plan will propose some direction that's a bit more tailored to reflect the actual context of these two arterial roads. Next, I'll direct you to the hub designation. So this is this purple coloring in the background. So hubs are areas around usually an O train station, but they're these high density areas with a wide variety of uses that are intended to generate or to ensure that that we can increase density around transit, and that that people can access what they need within a comfortable walk of their home. So with that, we'll go to before that, I'll just say that the current hub designation in the official plan extends on the north side of Richmond Road, as well as on the south side of Carling and further east of Carling. And the secondary plan proposes to refine that a little bit more. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So this is the proposed designation plan, and the secondary plan keeps the same designations that the official plan provides, but will provide some more tailored direction. So in this purple coloring is the hub designation. So this is and with the the official plan, the hub would extend on the north side of Richmond and on the south side of Carling and on the east side of Carling. But the secondary plan proposes to really keep that to be south of Richmond and north of Carling and west of the station. Next, in this orange color along Carling Avenue is the Carling Avenue Main Street corridor. And then there's the Richmond Road Main Street corridor. So both of them understand that they're corridors, but differentiating between the two. And then Richmond Road is in this blue-gray color that applies to the parcels on the north side of Richmond. Then in this cream, light yellow, if you will, color is the neighborhood designation. You'll also note these 4 stars on the map. So these are proposed future development parcels on the NCC land, 2 of which, one is south of Richmond and one is east of the station and west of Edgeworth. These are sites that could be redeveloped relatively quickly because the land is already there, and we just still need to work on refining the actual parcel size and the actual lot configuration. And then I'll direct you to the 2 stars within the Kichizibi-Mikan ramps. And so whenever the ramps are removed and that the Mikan is straightened out, then there will be land available for redevelopment there. And so for these 4, we're still in discussion with the NCC on the actual configuration and orientation of these lots. And hopefully by the time we go to planning committee, that will be, we will have a better sense of the actual parcel fabric. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. And this is the proposed height schedule. So the secondary plan proposes 6 height categories here. So we'll start with the low rise. It starts with low rise. So these are heights up to 4 stories. Then the second is the mid-rise 1 category, which is heights up to 7 stories. Then the mid-rise 2 category with heights up to 9 stories. Then we get into the high-rise designation. And so high-rise, so across the city, a high-rise building is 10 stories or above. So now we're getting into these taller buildings here. So we start with high-rise 1 with heights up to 18 stories, high-rise 2 with heights up to 30 stories, and then high-rise 3 with heights up to 40 stories. And you'll also note this hatching. So these lines, some properties have this hatching above them. And so this is where where there's additional height permissions that may be considered subject to certain area-specific policies. Most of these have to do with the ability to assemble. So if they were to assemble to create a larger lot and meet certain design requirements, then greater heights could be entertained. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Oh, and these schedules will be posted online, so you will have a chance to review them at home more carefully. So you don't need to internalize everything tonight. These will be shared afterwards. So we'll start with the hub. So as I mentioned, the hub is proposed to be contained by Richmond Road to the north and Carling Avenue to the south. So this is where we anticipate the tallest buildings in the secondary plan. So hubs across the city are really intended for the greatest densities, and the secondary plan really intends to keep that similar function. And also with a hub, this is where we want to see kind of the activity node to see have a wide variety of uses and to make sure that people have what they need close to their home. So unless it's a noxious use, or if it's a drive-through or a gas station, it pretty much anything else can pretty much be located in the hub. There might be some concerns, or might be some considerations around surface parking to make sure that surface parking is kept to a minimum. But otherwise, the hub designation will be very flexible in what is permitted. As we saw with RioCan's presentation, there will be a new park located at 2525 Carling. And so that, and because of its location within the larger within the entire area, this park is really centrally located to accommodate from people from all, to be a central gathering space for everybody around in the surrounding communities. And through some redevelopments, there will be new pedestrians and cycling connections that are built. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, which brings us to now we'll go over the two main streets. So there's Richmond Road, and in this blue color here on the north side of Richmond. So Richmond Road is so this part of Richmond Road is interesting because when you look at it within the larger city ecosystem, if you will, when you start at Hintonburg, then you go to when you go to Hintonburg, you go to Wellington West, then you go to West Road, then you get to the Sherbourne and New Orchard station areas, and then you come to Lincoln Field. So this is the logical continuation of this commercial main street so creating kind of a super main street, if you will, across the west to the west of the downtown. And the secondary plan really proposes to keep that function. And along Richmond, we would want to see buildings that frame the street. As a pedestrian, it's really important that it's much safer, it's much more comfortable that when you walk along a sidewalk, that what you interact with is the building is an active use at grade, rather than a parking lot or a driveway. And so with buildings that frame the street, with non-residential uses at grade, with a 2 to 4 story podium, you can really create a really comfortable pedestrian environment. Excuse me, and create a really comfortable pedestrian environment. And in order to support the non-residential uses that will be required at grade, there would then be high-rise buildings above them. So we're looking at heights up to 30 stories along the Richmond Road corridor. So with a 2 to 4 story podium, that's currently what we're seeing now. The existing form of Richmond is it's occupied by these non-residential uses, these commercial and office uses, some medical uses that are within buildings that are about 2 to 4 stories. So the secondary plan proposes to keep that function, keep that vision, but just framing the buildings toward the street. And if there's any surface parking, that would be located to the rear, and then allowing for high-rise residential development above. With that, we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about Carling. Awesome, thank you. So Carling is planned for mid and high-rise development. One of the big differences between Carling and Richmond is that right now Carling has a lot of existing mid-rise apartment buildings. So this plan, right now these heights here are match for where there's existing residential development. These heights match the current height categories there, and so it's in order to reflect the existing context, because a lot of these are desirable forms that meet a lot of our current planning objectives, particularly around transit. So we're very happy to see the existing residential here. Carling, like Richmond, we want to see a mix of uses increases a mix of uses, having non-residential uses at the grade of buildings. There's already a lot of non-residential uses on this stretch of Carling, and so as these sites redevelop, we would want to see those to be integrated at the grade of these buildings. However, unlike Richmond Road, where it'll be required that we have non-residential uses at grade, Carling will have the option for residential only or mixed use buildings. And the reason for that is we don't want to oversaturate the real estate market the rental market for commercial and retail spaces. And so if a developer comes in and says, yes, it's viable, we can make it work to have a retail space at the grade of these buildings, then so be it. The policies will definitely allow for it, but we don't want to require it and risk having a situation where there's now vacant retail space at the base of a building when it could have otherwise been used for housing. And similarly to Richmond, we want buildings that will frame the street to create a more comfortable pedestrian environment. And because Carling Avenue is actually quite a wide road, has a fairly wide right-of-way, we can see podiums that are a bit taller here. So these podiums, usually in city building and urban design, we have podiums that relate to the width of the road. And so Richmond has a bit of a narrower right-of-way, and and so therefore 2 to 4 stories creates a more comfortable human scale. Whereas along Carling, because it's a bit wider and because it's a bit wider, 4 to 6 story podiums does make sense here. And because the podium of a building can be a lot wider than the tower portion, there's an opportunity we can actually increase density and have quite a bit more units within those first 6 floors than we otherwise would if the podiums were lower. So with that, I'll go to the next slide, where we'll start going into the neighborhoods. Oh, I'm talking a lot. So now we'll start with Lincoln Heights. So the secondary plan touches on just a few parcels on some of the neighborhoods in the immediate area. Particularly with Lincoln Heights, most of what's included is along Regina Street. And so what we see is, and a majority of these townhouses along Regina are actually owned by Ottawa Community Housing. So we're anticipating some mid-rise development here, and through our discussions with OCH, it was pretty clear that there was an opportunity to that over the long term, when they forecast out over the long term, over a few decades down the road, that there might be an opportunity for some mid-rise development, so for some mid-rise affordable housing. And this is something that was quite exciting for the city to hear, particularly so close to transit, particularly so close to the future amenities along Richmond Road and to the amenities provided in the hub. So so this stretch of the neighborhood, we anticipate, mostly mid-rise and ideally with a fair bit of mid-rise affordable housing. With that, we'll go to the next slide. Now we get to Wood Park. So Wood Park, the stretch of Wood Park that's within the secondary plan is the portion along Edgeworth, the western side of Edgeworth, and then some parcels on the north side of Carling between Wentworth, Hartley, and Richardson. And so on the north side of Lawn Avenue, we want to see mostly low rise, except for the existing mid-rise building there at 1190 Richmond. Now we get to south of Lawn Avenue and north, between Lawn and Carling Avenue. On the west side of Edgeworth, is we see these really deep residential lots. These are quite deep neighborhood lots. They're about 55 to 60 meters, and they're within about a 200-meter radius of the station. And with the proposed connection at Lawn Avenue and all the work that's being done on Carling, these are about within a 300-meter walking distance from the LRT station. So it was very interesting. So there's a clear planning rationale here for us to see that there's an opportunity here to increase height permissions to allow for some high-rise development in the area. And granted, although these lots are pretty deep, they are quite thin. And so in order to accommodate a high-rise building or some high-rise development, some of these lots would need to be assembled. And once they meet a minimum size, if they meet certain design requirements and design criteria and meet other design objectives, then a high-rise building may be considered. And given the current lot fabric and how they would assemble, it's looking like at most there would be potentially 3 buildings on this stretch of Carling, this stretch of Edgeworth, north of Carling. And so the height we landed on with this, so using an urban design tool that we called the 45-degree angular plane, we were able to land at 18 stories. So this is a tool that is used citywide and across the province as well to whenever a high-rise building is proposed to be built near that abuts any existing low-rise buildings. And this is to ensure that we are able to increase density, all while ensuring that there's minimal impacts for the abutting low-rise. And so using this tool, using this urban design principle, we landed on 18 stories being the number that works to fit the local, to allow for both increases in density while also relating to the abutting neighborhood parcels. With that, we'll go to the next slide, please. Oh, actually, before we do, sorry, we could go back. Something to note about this, and this is, so we've been talking with a lot of stakeholders about this, particularly I know the Wood Park Community Association has reached out and has expressed a desire to see this number of 18 be reduced. We've also heard from development interests that this number should be increased. So there's a lot of, we're getting pulled in both directions here to see what is the development potential for these sites. And I want to say that right now, so there's still more study and analysis to be had. But right now, using this urban design tool that we have, this tool that is used across the city, that 18 stories is the number that we're currently that's currently defensible for us, that we have as a good rationale for to make, that's a good planning rationale for us. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And now it's QTN, so Queensway Terrace North, the third neighborhood that's directly within the secondary plan boundary. If you'll recall, the official plan actually designates this stretch of Carling. So this is the neighborhood south of Carling and west of the station. And the official plan actually designates this as hub, and as well as Main Street corridor. And really early on in this process, it was really clear that these parcels are too small, that the existing lot fabric, the existing buildings, they would never assemble to allow for anything greater. There's a lot of really new semis and new triplexes here, so that won't undergo redevelopment in the next 25 to 30 years. There are some parcels that frame the main street, that frame Carling, but they don't really, but most of them really orient to the side street. So it was pretty clear early on that these really make sense to be designated as neighborhood, and to be designated as neighborhood. And for this reason, this will be mostly low-rise, predominantly residential, with some opportunity for non-residential along Carling if a developer comes in and finds a viable site to allow for a commercial use, particularly at the base of a building. Then the policies would definitely be supportive of it. Though I don't know how likely that will be in the short or the medium term, but it is definitely an option, and the policies would allow for it. And so the low-rise option here is, at the beginning I was mentioning what the objectives of this plan is to allow for a variety of housing options. And so as you've seen just now, there's a lot of opportunity for mid and high-rise development over this in the entire area. And it's also important to ensure that there's a variety of low-rise options that are close to transit, that are close to amenities, to accommodate families and people at different living different lifestyles at different stages of life, to ensure that they all have that they can all find somewhere different in the area to help to meet their needs. And particularly the stretch of QTN will also be quite close to the redevelopment that happens at 2525 Carling. And so there will be the whatever non-residential amenities are built along the commercial main street will be really accessible to them, as well as anything that is built within the hub that directly abuts Carling will have some kind of frontage along Carling or some kind of entrance along Carling. So this stretch of QTN will be very close to all the amenities on the north side of Carling Avenue. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. So now I have 2 more slides left. So thank you all very much for your patience and bearing with me. So we're almost done before we can get to the questions. So first, I'll talk about the city's infrastructure master plan. So we've been updating. So this is a long-range planning document that directs how servicing will occur in the city, how infrastructure will grow in the city. And so the city has been updating the IMP to support new intensification targets and a lot of the growth that we're anticipating. There are sewer capacity constraints within this area, and the IMP does propose 2 significant trunk level sewer projects. So the first is the Pinecrest trunk sewer upgrade. So this is an upsize of about 1.3 kilometers of sanitary sewer scheduled to begin in 2029. This is actually the pipe that I was mentioning earlier when I was talking about the Kichisimi-Mikan and the Carling Avenue intersection. This is that pipe that is looking to be upgraded. And so right now it's scheduled for 2029, though if we've heard it from our infrastructure group that there is definitely a high chance that this will get moved up to align itself with the other work that's being proposed by the Mikan. The second project is the Pinecrest trunk flow reduction project. So it's an inflow and infiltration reduction project to help generate capacity in the West Nepean collector set to begin in 2024. As part of the secondary plan, we will include some policies. We've been directed to include policies that require local servicing studies and financial plans upon a certain redevelopment. We want to make sure that any redevelopment that comes in has adequate capacity, has adequate connections to any wastewater pipes. And so it is possible that development, in some cases, depending on their access to certain piping or to certain trunks, may be paused until studies and projects are shown that they can provide sufficient sewer capacity. So I know this was a concern along Edgeworth, and so so until adequate servicing is demonstrated, there's a chance that development may be paused. So with that, we'll go to the next and final slide before our question period. And so now the next steps. So we have had tonight's open house, and then in the new year in January, I'll begin a 30-day circulation of the policy documents and the schedule. So the public will have a chance to review the policies in detail, as well as the mapping, and then can send any feedback they may have to me or to my colleagues. And following that, I'll be reviewing all the feedback that's received, both at previous stakeholder meetings, at tonight's open house, and feedback that's collected through the circulation period shortly after. And then hopefully, while reviewing all that feedback, see how the policies can be adjusted. And then from there, we'll go to planning and housing. We'll bring the secondary plan forward to planning and housing committee at some point, ideally in the winter of 2024, but potentially the spring, though I'm really pushing for it to go into the winter. And then hopefully we'll receive the committee recommendation for approval, which will then go to city council also in winter or spring 2024. And with that, we'll go to the next slide and begin our question period.
Thanks for that. Yeah, take a moment's break here. Well, there's a lot of presentation, but we have many good questions to follow up on. We're going to go back to just a general focus on the future development. We finished the last question discussing the metro, and there's a bit of follow-up around how's the metro handling parking. Are they going to have an underground parking garage? Is it going to be paid parking or free parking? So a bit of clarification around that would be appreciated.
Sure, and I think, yes, Stu would be the best person to answer.
Can you hear me, folks?
Yep.
Okay, great. It's a very specific question this early on. I can tell you that when we get to that point in the redevelopment of the site, their parking will be underground. Whether it's pay parking or not, I honestly don't know at this stage of the game. I think our preference would be for it not to be. And in fact, Metro would have some very strong say in that. Although we would own the building, they would have a say in what their customers have to or have to not pay. So I would suggest it would be underground. I would not suggest that it would be pay, but I really don't know at this point.
Thank you. So there's some listed high rises there, but the person just wants to clarify, like, how many high rises would finally be located in this area?
Are you referring to the RioCan site or the entire secondary plan?
They are not specific, so maybe just do you have a sense for the entire secondary plan area?
Yep, and for the RioCan site for 2525 Carling, there's around 10 to 11 towers. And then for the entire secondary plan, somewhere around 30 to 35.
Okay.
However, that was an analysis that was done a few months ago to help supplement the infrastructure master plan. I haven't done the analysis recently, but yeah, we're looking at around somewhere in the 30 tower range.
Thank you. So in those buildings, there's questions around types of housing. So will there be a sense of how many 3-bedroom units? Is there any opportunity for co-op housing or multi-generational housing? And do you have a sense of even like generally the size of units going in?
I can speak to the RioCan part of the secondary plan. I think it's kind of what I said earlier. We expect a complete range from studios to 3 bedrooms, maybe even 4 bedrooms, and some of the townhouse podium options that we hope to be able to offer in terms of unit size. In terms of square footage, really haven't gotten there yet. I mean, that's more of an internal building design thing that we're not there yet. But in terms of high level square footages, I think you could say anything from 500 to 1,300 square feet. But again, that's a general statement just based on some other buildings that we've done. What was the other part of it? Oh, types of housing?
Like co-op, multi-generational housing, anything like that sense?
Again, a bit early days. From our perspective, we're open to all types of housing. So, and feel that you have to offer all types of housing when you're building an area this large or developing an area this large. You need to distinguish buildings from each other and residential units from each other to make sure you're not competing with yourself when you actually start putting people in the buildings. So the best way to do that is to increase the diversity of the offering and
Mhm.
offer different types of housing.
Yeah, Stuart, also, we looked at not just residential as well.
That's correct,
So
Brian.
I mean, we're focusing on this image, what you've seen is pretty much residential with commercial at grade, but at one point we entertained working with Ottawa Little Theater.
Yeah.
Was looking to relocate and they thought this would be a great location. So, that would change a lot of things around. So we haven't limited to this particular model type in any way. So.
Yeah, I think we've also, Rod, to add to that a little bit, we are, in our vision, we're allowing for office as a component of this. I mean, the office market right now across Canada is difficult, but, by the time some of these phases do get built out, we envision a bounce back in certain areas. And Ottawa being a government town, there can be opportunities for institutional or more office related uses, which we are allowing for in all of our Ottawa projects. So again, I think it's important. I've used the term a couple of times, but in our minds, we're city building here or community building, and that requires diversity. So the key that we've been working with Jocelyn and the city on is to make sure that flexibility is there in the secondary plan to allow for different types of uses, both residential, commercial, institutional. We want to make sure that all those opportunities exist.
And this is a follow-up a little more for Jocelyn or the city team. Has the city considered applying for any federal funds to stimulate affordable housing in this area?
So maybe I'll ask Royce to answer the question, but I can take a first kick at the can that the federal government has released the Housing Accelerator Fund, and I know that the city has submitted an application. Those are about all the details I know. So I know Royce is really involved with that. So Royce, if you want to maybe supplement that a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Joss. As part of our application, we have an action plan. We've highlighted a number of initiatives that we would do to increase housing in order to be eligible for federal funding, and increasing density at transit station areas such as Lincoln Fields. Lincoln Fields is one of the plans that we actually identified. So this type of secondary plan would provide us for eligibility to access federal funding.
Thank you. And so is there a sense for the larger number of, like, beyond this lot or this development, the total projected number of residential units? Is there any estimate at this time?
So before we go to committee, I'll be doing a more formal population projection forecasting. But we did again for the infrastructure master plan, did a bit of a rough unit count projection, and we got to around 11,000 units across the entire planned area. That will need to be refined. That is definitely a ballpark figure. But before we go to committee, I'll have something a bit more detailed and accurate. But at least hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of the range. And something to add is this is a 25. This policy document has a 25-year range and potentially maybe kept for longer. So this is a long-range planning document. So these 11,000 units, if we'll call it that, will come throughout over the years, and won't just happen very suddenly.
Thank you. And so is there any consideration going higher than 40 stories? Or will building heights be strictly enforced under the secondary plan? Would, in the future, private developers be able to request building height increases?
Yeah, so any third party is welcome to, as part of development application, can submit an official plan amendment. This is something that they're able to do under the Planning Act. This is so that's why when I was first saying that a secondary plan improves the predictability of development outcomes, as opposed to saying it directs development outcomes, and the reason for it is because of these official plan amendments. So if somebody wants to come forward with an application that's greater, to seek heights greater than what's currently permitted, they have that legal ability to do so under the Planning Act. We did talk with RioCan about possibly allowing for a 45-story building on the eastern edge of their site, closest to the station, and that is I believe still being considered. Yeah, that's still being considered. So there is a bit of flexibility, particularly in the hub, and that's again the hubs are citywide hubs are these areas where we want to see the greatest densities, and so yeah, and so there's a bit of flexibility there in the hub. Though if there is a building that's greater than 40 stories, there will probably be one, and at least brought on by the secondary plan. Anything else would have to be done through an official plan amendment, or wait until in 5 to 10 years when we undertake a municipal comprehensive review. So this is a fulsome evaluation of our official plan, and potentially will change the definition of high rise through that process.
Okay, thank you. So with all this density, over a 25-year plan coming into the area, there's a lot of questions around the investment in social infrastructure. Things like parks, we saw some of those, early learning childcare centers, schools, libraries, rec facilities. Is there any plan for that?
So yeah, parks, as redevelopment occurs, there'll be more parkland will be conveyed through the redevelopment. So the 2525 Carling is not the only park we'll see in the area. There are other parcels as they redevelop. Will be conveying about 10% of their land for park space. Regarding schools, the policies will allow the flexibility for a school to be built. However, that's really left to all the schools. So again, maybe Royce can help with a bit of the forecasting there, but school boards do come in or do their own population forecasting and do work and do observe these plans to find opportunities for land. But their funding model is pretty strange. They all have to go to the province to compete for the same pool of money. Yeah, maybe Royce, you can explain that a little bit in better detail.
Yeah, so the school boards will determine if a site is required here, and they'll look at the population. To also look at the existing area, the catchment area for school and existing schools, and see what that population will look like with this and the phasing. We talked about a 25-year plus plan for the number of dwellings, and they have to make a determination if they need another school in addition to their existing schools in the area. So that's really up to the school boards in terms of their planning.
And
Libraries, things like that.
So this is something, and maybe Councillor Kavanagh wants to speak to this, but this was something that was explored at the beginning because it'd be great to have a library. But I know the libraries are pretty strict on where they can place their libraries. So maybe Councillor, I see you're unmuted if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, just quickly, it's hard to speak for a library board, but they are independent. And so they make their decision of where they want to be, but they do it very carefully. They look at the demographics, and they're really trying to reach communities where they would be in need. But their rule of thumb is that they are going to be at minimum 2 kilometers from any other branch. It kind of puts Lincoln Fields at a disadvantage since there's one at Carlingwood. It's not that far. So that's all I can say, because again, they make their decision, and but I'm pretty confident that Bay Ward in general is a good candidate to get another library, but not necessarily here.
Okay, that's helpful.
And
Sorry.
Sorry, one more thing, Elizabeth. I
Yeah,
keep cutting you off. The amphitheater in the park. So again, this space for more community building, for the arts, for performance, for music, for culture, if you will, I think is a really exciting opportunity. One that I hope the secondary plan really pushes for is this art space in the park.
That's great, thanks. Focusing back more on the retail, there's some questions and interest around will there be spaces for new restaurants or coffee shops?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that one, at least within our property, Elizabeth. Very much so. We envision restaurants, coffee shops, entertainment on a number of levels. We think that's critical again to the city building idea or the community building idea. We are creating a lot of opportunities through this master plan for patio space or for outdoor space that could be partly patio space. and for activities that connect to a park, which allow for other outdoor type of activities. So yes, the long-winded answer is yes, very much. We consider those to be part of the ground level retail fiber of what we're hoping to build here.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to green space because we haven't had a lot of discussion on that yet. So we see a lot of parkland in this plan. Is some of that going to be focused for like playground for kids, maybe soccer nets, swings? What kinds of amenities?
So it's tough to say at this time. I know, yeah, programming really get there. We have the Parks and Facilities Master Plan that kind of directs, that looks at park needs overall and looks at what an area is deficient in. And so at the secondary plan stage, can't confirm what that actual programming will look like. But looking to create spaces of people of all ages, of all abilities, it will be important. And I know play amenities is a big part of that. I know our Parks Department, our Parks and Facilities Planning team really likes to see children's spaces and amenities for children in a lot of our parks. And there will also be little urban park. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. And just further on those parks, I know this is probably a similar challenge to discuss at this point, but maybe just a note for feedback. There's questions around making sure there's good winter use of parks, rinks, things like that, so that it's all seasons.
So again, that'll be determined through whenever the parks do get built. Programming and animation will be determined there. It would be great to definitely see all season animation of the space. And I know because there will be some privately, Rod called them pops, so these privately owned public spaces where on some of the properties here, particularly on the 2525 Carling, where the developer, the landowner, has a lot more autonomy on animating and programming. So one of the benefits of these pops is that they're not city run. Therefore, the private sector can work a lot quicker to have a winter's market or some kind of winter event on this space that's not necessarily technically conveyed parkland. And yeah, Councillor, I see you have something to add.
Well, if we're talking about that big space where it would be handed over to the city, we'd certainly have discussions, and we would do public consultations on that. Perhaps present some ideas, kind of like what we do for park renewals, but of course this one's brand new, so it'll be a little bit more involved. So that would happen. We would look at that to see what makes sense for this kind of community. And as people mentioned, who's going to live there, what kind of people, and what would they be interested in. So those would have to all be taken into consideration, plus the broader community. Thanks.
That's helpful. And on that point, would there be any use for community benefit funds for this area or nearby parks?
I can speak to that, but I see Councillor, you still have your hand up. So if you,
Yeah, well, to be discussed for sure. Absolutely. No, we want to maximize the use so it's positive for the entire community, the new community that would be moving into that property, as well as the broader community. So let's see what's missing and would make sense. So yeah, lots of discussion to be had for sure.
Right. In a very specific question about the green space in the area, has there been any thought about maintaining the crab apple orchard on the east side of the Lincoln Fields station?
So that's currently on the NCC land, and as part of in our discussions with the NCC about creating residential parcels there, it's a consideration that's been brought up, but it would be at the discretion of the NCC. I know they have particular tree canopy targets and so on, and so it would be at their discretion whenever they come forward with a redevelopment to see what happens there, and if they have some kind of tree retention policy or some kind of tree replacement policy and so on. But it would be outside of the city's mandate.
Okay. And I'm not sure if this is a question our team can answer today. It might have more with wildlife folks, but is there any thought of keeping some kind of access for wildlife from south of Carling to the Ottawa River?
That is definitely, yeah, I'll gladly take that question back to our natural systems group.
Interesting thought for sure.
Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
so there was lots of questions about traffic, so let's head back there for a bit. There's a question, will the Connet intersection be changed to allow traffic to go straight through, so south to north instead of east only?
So I know, so through the city's currently updating its transportation master plan. And as part of phase one was the active transportation component. So a lot of sidewalks and cycle tracks were approved for that process back in May. And now we're doing phase two, which is the roadway and transit network. And Connaught was actually identified for funding still to be confirmed, but there was Connaught was identified to undergo a feasibility study to look at different components of mobility around Connaught. So it's something that's, whether that specific issue is being addressed will be confirmed as TMP update moves on. But know that there is a plan study or plan review for that intersection, though the details are not yet confirmed. And we can share the link for the TMP, the engagement process of the TMP, if you want to share that feedback with our transportation planners.
Absolutely, yeah, it's an important project. So during construction, that's going to have effects on access to the site and around that. So how will that impact traffic on Carling? And while they remove the bridge, where will cars go while this construction takes place?
So that is still all to be, after the secondary plan gets approved, we will begin a functional design study. And that's at that point where it'll get into the real details to look at connectivity, to look at to look at what needs to close for what kind of period of time, and we'll go over the construction details there. So we don't have that yet, but there will be a point before construction occurs where that will get considered, and there is a lot of consultation that's also done through the environmental assessment process. So people will have a chance to voice their concerns and bring feedback before the construction actually begins.
Thanks. This is pretty specific. What are your plans for the slip lanes on Carling?
I'm
not sure. A slip lane?
The existing right in, right out access from the to the Mikan. The plan would be to ideally to eliminate those and replace them with a signalized intersection. But if if the person wants to write back, if there's something a bit more precise, happy to take a second.
Sounds good. And on that note, if you need clarification on the questions that are being answered, please feel free to send those into the chat, the questions. We have about 10 minutes left for tonight's questions, but we will certainly have more questions than we can cover in 10 minutes. So we will absolutely be creating a document that will have answers to questions that we haven't been able to ask this evening. So please feel free to keep sending the questions in, clarification. We will get to you. A couple folks have sent very specific, lot specific questions. We have every intention to following up directly on those as well. So we'll move to some cycling and pedestrian questions. So just a bit of interest in the evidence around the discussion of the current situation is quite unsafe. Have there been incidents in the area? Has there been tracking of how many? How have you defined that it's an unsafe area?
So as part of the traffic analysis that's being done, they're working with our traffic safety group to look and pulling a lot of the data. So they'll come forward with a fulsome analysis on the safety of the actual safety of the current access to the parkway, to the Mikan, in terms of number of accidents or in terms of number of incidents. I don't have that data yet. But a lot of it comes from feedback we've received through consultation, from having gone to the area quite a number of times. Gone to the area a number of times and walking that pathway alone. Walking that pathway, from a qualitative perspective, it's definitely not felt safe. looking at what's being proposed through the cycle tracks that are proposed to be built through stage 2, whether we have the data or the cycle tracks that are just proposed to end along the curbside lane at Carling, whether we have the data or not, we just know that having a cycle track that just ends in a curbside lane is just not safe. And it's not comfortable. Even if there's no incidents, it's not comfortable for anybody. But we will have a fulsome report on that data with the traffic analysis.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. And if the NCC parcels are used for residential, what kind of access will be required to these buildings? Will pedestrians still need to cross, access points, specifically more on the south side of Carling?
So in terms of the details around the construction on the NCC land, that will be like any development or any construction, all those details get refined at the site plan stage. One thing that in terms of the existing MUPs that currently go under Carling Avenue, those connections would be retained, even if the portion of the Carling Bridge is replaced with some kind of berm. Again, there would be these tunnels that ensure that pedestrians don't necessarily have to come up all the way to Carling to then go back down on the north side of the road. So this would eliminate a point of interaction between cars and pedestrians, or maintaining that connection. And then the NCC, in our discussions with them, have also committed that any multi-use pathway or any pathway that needs to be relocated as part of the redevelopment would be done so. So there would be no loss of connection. It would there's just some adjustments.
Yeah, that's helpful. And maybe revisiting the question around properties on Edgeworth that are planned. How are those intended to be acquired, and how will they be developed?
Yeah, so the proposal for Edgeworth, so those high rises we see south of Lawn Avenue, those would not be, this would be left to developers who come in or to anybody who wants to redevelop those properties. So any landowner or anybody who buys them. This is not a city initiative. This is not the city's not coming in to build here. This is simply the secondary plan is simply looking at an opportunity at a planning opportunity. And if the market conditions are right, if there's people who are interested in acquiring these lands and meeting those design criteria, then they would have the ability to redevelop. But this is not a city. The city is simply building the sandbox for this to happen, and then letting anybody who wants to own these lots the ability to develop within them.
Thanks. As we're getting a little tight on time, I'm going to move to some process questions.
Sure.
So there's been quite a few references to future discussions around this site. So just a bit more clarity maybe on further community consultations on these changes, and future issues around pipe construction and impacts on surrounding neighborhoods. Maybe a bit of an outline on next steps.
Sure. So in terms of that first point you're bringing, that's specifically for Edgeworth, the consultation for what's proposed on Edgeworth?
No,
Or
I think moving back to the secondary plan process here, and there's been a few future touch points mentioned, but maybe you can give kind of a high level overview of future consultation opportunities.
Yes, we've had to date several meetings, about 5 meetings with a lot of the community associations in the area. So there's been quite a bit of touch points there. And in the coming weeks, Peter and I have we'll be speaking at a few community association meetings, notably Queensway Terrace North in December, and then Wood Park in January. And we are available to meet with other community associations and other resident groups in that time to kind of go over a bit more specifically how things will about what's going on in their neighborhood. In terms of, but these will be requested by the community groups themselves. This, in terms of city initiated meetings or touch points, this is the last one until we get to planning committee. However, if people reach out, if people want to set up a meeting, if people want to set up a discussion or ask us to join their meetings, we're more than happy to take some time and do that and get into a more in-depth discussion there. regarding the servicing capacity will be looked at through development applications, as well as through the infrastructure master plan. Just because the secondary plan provides a built form direction, it doesn't guarantee that that is what will happen. There's still every development application that comes in is still reviewed, goes through careful review through the various groups and departments here at the city to make sure that everything works, that everything is aligned, that we're not putting too much strain on our servicing, to make sure that we meet urban design goals, to meet our transportation goals, et cetera. So there's still and all of those details can't be handled at the secondary plan level. They're really done as individual applications come in.
Okay, great. And so that one you mentioned in December, is that on December 12th? You might not have this on the top of your head, but I have a question about an in-person consultation happening on December 12th. So I feel like that might be the community association one you mentioned.
I believe so, Pete. Yeah, it's December 12th.
Agreeing? Okay, yeah. Great. So can you just say the name of the community association again, who you're meeting with? Because
Queensway Terrace.
if people want to participate, maybe they can reach out and get more information from the community association as well on that one. So thank you. And so final question, just for tonight at least. There are many more questions to be answered and we are committed to doing so. But for RioCan, when do you plan to seek site plan approval to start building some towers, like phase 1 estimate?
At the moment, that's somewhat out of our control. We can't do anything of that ilk until this secondary plan is approved by council and the corresponding zoning is also approved by council. So we can't do anything now until then. I believe our plan will be, and the discussions we've been having internally are, once the secondary plan is final and binding and there are no appeals to it, which is something that can happen in the planning culture of Ontario. And we know that the permissions are in place, then we'll start with first phase site plan, I would say immediately after that. But based on Jocelyn's timeline earlier, I suspect that's still mid next year at the earliest, Jocelyn. I got the impression based on your timelines, and then with corresponding appeal periods, of course.
Pushing for winter, Stu. I'm pushing for, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, if it's winter, that's better. Yeah, I saw spring in there somewhere too, but yeah, I mean, it would be, from our standpoint, we'd probably mobilize our consultant team and start working on our submission package mid next year, once all of this has been hopefully approved and endorsed by council and has standing.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we got through quite an impressive number of questions. We have more work to do, and we will continue to work on those. But I appreciate all of the wide range of questions this evening. Jocelyn, I don't know if you want to say anything before we pass it on to Councillor Kavanagh to wrap up the evening.
Sure. Yeah, and just want to say that and some of you attended a stakeholder meeting a few weeks ago where you also had some questions and so in the coming weeks, I'll be addressing, I'll be taking the time to go over the outstanding questions that come up from this meeting and that have come up from that meeting and do them all in one go. And yeah, with that, please reach out to me if you have any questions, if you want to discuss things further. And yeah, Peter and I will be attending a few community meetings. So if you want to invite us to some more than happy to attend. And with that, that's all I have to say. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh. Wow, thanks to everyone for participated. That's a lot to absorb in one evening. Some of us have had the benefit of seeing this presentation a couple of times, and it's still like you're just absorbing everything. A lot of change, especially that whole thing about Carling Bridge. That took me a while to absorb. Like, what do you mean we don't need a bridge? It's a game changer. The fact that the transitway is not going to be there. It's going to be green space. There's just so many things that we're just not picturing yet. That's big stuff. And it's going to be lively. It's an opportunity. Great ideas, great questions. Really appreciate your participation. I know it's frustrating not to get them all in this short time. But as has been stated, we're going to work on them. And I hope to have this presentation online for people to see who weren't able to make it tonight. I know some people had internet issues, so so they'll be able to see. So thank you very much. Thank you to my city team, to RioCan, to all participants. It's been really helpful for you to share your ideas, and I think we're going to make a better community for it. So thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening.